Well, it's such a great honor of mine to be back with you. I am a huge fan of your church and pastor who leads with such high integrity and passion to reach people for Christ here in Sioux Falls and really beyond throughout the state and nation. In just 1 year, you have grown from 3,100 people to 4,400 people, which is absolutely unheard of. It really is. You've opened two new buildings, one new campus, and you baptized 399 people in just 1 year. And by the way, if you are one of those 399, I just want to say from my heart to yours, way to go. So proud of you that God is doing this new work in your life. And I'm telling you, you are among the top 10 fastest growing churches in our nation. And what God is doing here is miraculous. If you're new to this church, by the way, so glad you're here. You are experiencing something that doesn't happen very often. So I'm just very honored to be on this stage with you and to be good friends with your senior pastor and others here on your staff. Just a fantastic staff. Proud of you as a church for doing whatever it takes to reach people for Christ, not to become big. That's not the goal. The goal is to give as many people an opportunity to have a new life, to experience forgiveness, to get their marriages and families back on track. And that's the reason you're doing what you're doing. I'm just, again, so proud of you for that. By the way, if you missed this last series, How to Float in a Flood by Adam and Travis, fantastic teaching, some of the best in the nation. If you missed any of those, you got to go back and listen to them. I watched them, and they were just phenomenal. So just way to go, church. Today I want to talk mainly to parents, but also to grandparents, coaches, teachers, anybody that has anything to do with children or kids or teenagers, the next generation, because the gravitational pull away from God and faith today in our country and world is so strong, although I have great hope for our nation these days, but it's so strong away from faith that if we're going to continue to impact our schools, our neighborhoods, cities, and world, it's got to start with you and me in our own home. I've got a hunting dog, Blue. His name is Blue, a chocolate lab. I absolutely love him. This was last year. We were on a pheasant hunt, and he's obviously hot on a bird. Love this dog, but he commits unspeakable sins throughout our neighborhood, and especially at the dog park. It's embarrassing at the dog park. But he eats coyote scat. I mean, whenever he can, he grabs some scat. He once grabbed a squirrel that was flattened on the road while my wife was walking him. It was halfway down his throat with its tail hanging out the side of his mouth. So, of course, my wife yelled at him to drop it, but he just looked at her, and then he just sucked it down, tail and all. She came home fuming. And this is what she said: "You won't believe what your idiot dog did today." I said, "Well, sometimes you got to suck down a squirrel." But his biggest sin, and yeah, he has a love-hate deal with squirrels, mainly hates them. But his biggest sin is when he disappears and just takes a tour of the neighborhood on his own, on his own deal. So we yell for him up and down the streets like insane people until someone 4 blocks away walks up to our house with Blue on a leash, and they will say to us, "Is this your dog? He came down to visit our kids. Is this your dog? He came to our party." Twice I had to retrieve him from inside somebody's house, because alongside Blue's love for life is this streak of defiance and disobedience. The last time he ran off, he was gone for 6 hours. And when I told about it in church, people started sending me things. One person sent a GPS collar. Another sent an electric fence that they purchased. And another left a big treat basket on our porch with doggy treats in it, inferring that bribery is the way you get a dog to obey. But those are just bandages. I mean, he wouldn't need an electric fence, shock collar, or GPS if he was obedient. I mean, he's got a great life. He doesn't work, takes naps, doesn't pay for meals. But ask him to obey, he's like, forget it. Anybody have a child like that? You know, doesn't work, takes naps, doesn't pay for anything, but ask him to obey, and he's like, get off my case. So, you know, you set up curfews, you put a tracking device on his phone, bribe him with treats, but those are just bandages for the real problem, which is a defiant heart. By the way, we all have a defiant heart. But Proverbs 22 says this, it says, folly is bound up in the heart of a child. It's so true. In fact, because that's true, children almost can't help it. It's just bound up inside of them. I had 3 sisters growing up, and almost every single day, my goal was to make them cry. Pinching them, picking on them. There's nothing my parents could do. I would actually think, I'm going to get spanked for this, but it's worth it. My goal is just to drive them crazy. My wife and I have 2 kids and 7 grandkids. We love them all, but gang, I think raising children is the most exhausting job there is. And sometimes all you can do is just survive. Just try to get through it. There was a couple on a flight who had 2 kids under the age of 3. And when this flight took off, these 2 kids took off. They were kicking the seats in front of them, demanding treats. You know, by the end of this flight, the mom was exhausted. The plane landed, and as she was picking up toys and sippy cups, an older, well-dressed businessman who had been sitting in front of them turned to the mom and said to her, my wife and I would give anything to have 2 kids. And immediately she, you know, put her hand on her heart. She said, oh, were you unable to have kids of your own? He said, no, we have 5 kids, and we give anything to have 2. But I'm just saying, raising kids is the hardest thing. It's the hardest thing, most demanding thing you will ever do. And so this talk is helping the next generation win. And I'm going to give you my best shot at how to do that. Today, my wife Lori and I are on the backside of this, and as hard as it was, raising Megan and David has been our greatest joy and accomplishment. I mean, we had our share of yelling matches, slam doors, total meltdowns, and that was just my wife. But today, our 2 adult kids are confident, they're achieving, they are faith-filled. Every weekend, we fill a whole row at church there in the Twin Cities. And I watch my kids and their spouses worshiping God every weekend. And I'm filled with gratitude for who they've become. But I also know there are parents, grandparents here today who are heartbroken. Proverbs 10 says a wise child brings joy. Don't they? They just bring joy to you. But a foolish child brings grief. And for some of you, it's been nothing but grief. But gang, there's hope. Because no matter what's going on with your kids, a child's greatest influence is not their teachers, it's not their coaches or even their peers, it is still their parents. And if you've got a child who's in trouble, I am telling you there's hope, and it's never too late for God and you to turn that around. By the way, your goal in parenting is not to make your kids happy. I hear parents say this all the time, I just want my kids to be happy, and it makes me crazy. I mean, what if we said something like this? I just want my kids to be productive. I want my kids to be honest, moral, generous, and self-controlled, because if you can help your kids become those things, then they'll be happy. So here's the question of the day. How do we help our kids become responsible human beings who add joy to life instead of chaos and pain? How do we get them from 0 to 18 with their faith and their life intact? I just want to say a whole row of young people right here in the front taking notes. I'm just so proud of you and whoever raised you, because they're doing a great job. I want to show you something from Dr. Tim Elroy, who studies this generation coming up behind us. And he says, this is our scene today. And he says, so S stands for speed. And this is our world today. Everything's fast. But if I grew up in a world where everything is fast, I might assume that slow is bad. I might assume that anything that takes time, like an education or saving money or building a career, is bad because it's too slow. C stands for convenience. I mean, one swipe on my phone and Amazon delivers to my door. It's amazing, and I love it. But if everything's convenient, I might assume that difficult is bad. You know what's not convenient? A job. You gotta go. It's not convenient. Don't want to, most of the time. What's not convenient is homework. Who wants to do that? Nobody. What's not convenient is a 1-year-old. They're trying to kill you. I mean, it's not convenient at all. So when things get difficult, the next generation might think, why is life so hard? And the answer is because life is hard. But if they don't understand that, they might be tempted to quit. E stands for entertainment. We had 6 black and white TV channels. Can you imagine? How did we survive? We had 6 TV channels. Today, on my phone, I have Instagram, Spotify, and YouTube. But if we are entertained 24/7, we might assume that boring is bad. You know what's boring? Being a stay-at-home mom. Terribly. School can be extremely boring. Marriage. You have seasons of boring in marriage. I love what this Olympian champion weightlifter said. He said this: the key to success in life, I just love this statement, the key to success is to fall in love with boredom. Rep after rep, showing up after showing up, day after day, doing the same things until suddenly you're successful, no matter what you do. N stands for nurture. I mean, nurture's a good word, but there are more safety devices today. I mean, I tried to buckle my 2-year-old granddaughter into her car seat. It was so complicated. Finally, she just pushed my hand away and said, like this, Bubba, and she buckled herself in. So, you know, we took away monkey bars. You know, they wear helmets everywhere they go. Some people are still wearing masks. I don't get that. But if everything is safe and everything is nurturing, we might assume that risk is bad. I mean, we are so safe, and I think it leads to a softness. And life is tough, and it requires some risk. E stands for entertainment. If I grew up thinking that I'm entitled to a phone, car, and allowance, I can assume that maybe labor is bad. I mean, if I get treats and trophies just for showing up, why should I work for anything? But again, this is kind of our scene in the world today. And gang, I love the conveniences of our world, but they can shield us from the things that actually make us people of strength. So in the next few minutes, I want to touch on 2 non-negotiables that I think give us the best chance in helping the next generation become faith-filled and responsible people. And by the way, there's no guarantees when you're raising kids. You might do everything right and still have a kid go off the rails. I had a mom send me an email saying that 2 of her boys turned out great, even got baptized last summer, but she says her 3rd son, and I quote, is a difficult and defiant kid who's been through treatment twice and is currently in juvenile detention. Same parents, same upbringing, 2 different outcomes. By the way, for this troubled child, there's still hope, and there's still forgiveness. I believe God's going to take hold of him if the parents don't give up, and I don't believe they will give up. But to give your kids the best shot at becoming responsible, faith-filled people, number 1, we got to live it ourselves as adults. Simply put, if you want your kids to follow Jesus genuinely, then you must follow Jesus. If you want your kids to respect authority, then you and I must respect authority. If we want our kids to become morally responsible human beings, we as adults must be morally responsible people. Proverbs 27 says this: The righteous lead blameless lives. Blessed are their children after them. Now, nobody's blameless. We all make mistakes. I do, you do, we all do. We all blow it. But the point is, these children are blessed because of how their parents are living their lives. So some of the questions we as adults should ask ourselves: what am I modeling in the areas of faith? What am I modeling in the areas of honesty, sexual morality, spending? What am I modeling in the area of anger, managing my temper? You know, what is my attitude toward work? Am I always complaining about work, or is work something that I view as a privilege? I get to do this. How is alcohol handled in your home? And how am I going to protect my kids from forming addictions? Gang, I say this lovingly, and I'm not saying it about you because I don't even know you guys, but I've met a lot of people. I think the biggest reason for irresponsible kids these days are irresponsible adults who are just being poor role models. And so I want you to look at Deuteronomy 6, 5 through 7. This is just a foundational verse for all of us, and including myself. It says, love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and strength. That's number one. These commandments that I'm going to give you today are to be on your hearts, parents. Impress them upon your kids. The Bible says here's how this works. Make sure that you love God with all your heart, parents. Make sure you don't lie, cheat, steal, covet, and commit adultery. Make sure you have your act together first, and then impress these things on your kids, because you cannot impress something on your children that you don't embody yourself. God says there's a direct link between the quality of our lives as adults and the quality of our kids' life, that our behavior and values as parents will have a direct impact on the behavior and values of our kids. One Sunday morning, I was in line for coffee at a hotel in Indianapolis, and the two dads in front of me were the coaches to their sons' baseball teams, fifth grade kids' baseball teams. And my hotel was filled with teams, fifth graders, kids, parents, and grandkids. Sunday morning, church wasn't even on their radar. And so I was in line behind these two dads, and they were the coaches. And just to make conversation, I said, "What do you two guys do about church?" And the one guy looked at me like, "What? What kind of a question is that?" But the other looked at me with sadness in his eyes, and he said this: "We try to watch online, but I feel like we're failing." And I get it. This is really hard to navigate. But gang, when sports and travel take priority over church and faith, the outcomes are predictable. I just want to say I'm so proud of those of you who are parents here today, grandparents, who are leading your families to church. Dads here today, so proud of you. Thank you for standing up. All you need to do, you don't need to know how to pray. If you just lead your family to church, that speaks volumes about who you are as a person. Moms and dads, way to go. We're here today. I promise you that most of your kids' coaches are not teaching them about God. Most of your kids' coaches aren't teaching them about faith or even truth. Neither are their teachers, peers, or social media feeds. So how are they going to get there? What are the odds that my kids will follow Jesus if I don't make faith and worship a priority in my own life? What are the odds of my kids being morally and sexually pure if I've been divorced a couple times and I'm now cohabitating with a third? What are the odds my kids will be generous and self-controlled if I'm not those things? I love this, what Dr. Phil has said, and he's one of the greatest, well, I shouldn't say one of the greatest, but he's a very, very good author. He says this, Dr. Phil: the key to raising a child of character is being a person of character yourself. Take responsibility for your own life first, because good or bad, your children take on your values, your beliefs, and your behaviors. Gang, how we live our lives as parents is the number one predictor of how our kids will choose to live their lives. I keep this little video of the sheep in my phone. I pull it up every once in a while to remind myself that I need to stay out of the ditches. And I make mistakes just like you do. And this guy is like, how do I deal with this? And maybe today is the day when some of you think to yourself, well, maybe it's time to stay out of the ditch of overspending. Maybe it's time to stay out of the ditch of overdrinking, if that's a problem in your life. Maybe it's time to stay out of the ditch of overindulgence or overcommitment or missing church way too many times. Maybe it's time for me to make some changes. Again, we've all blown it. I've blown it just as much as anybody here in this room. None of us are perfect, but maybe today is the day you put a stake in the ground and make some changes. Because here's the truth. There is never a time when your kids are not watching your life. Doesn't matter how old they are. Your children might be 8, 18, or 38. There is never a time where you as a parent are not being watched by your children and having an impact, good or bad, but it starts with you and me. Let me shift the focus just for a second off parents for a minute, and I want to say something to those of you in your teens and 20s. Meg Jay is a clinical psychology at University of Virginia. She wrote a book called The Defining Decade, Why Your 20s Matter. Phenomenal book. She did a TED Talk. Y'all ought to go look at that today. TED Talk, Meg Jay. She writes these words. She says, too many people squander their 20s. This is so true. Only to pay the price for decades to come. 80% of life's most significant events take place by age 35. Things like education, skill development, career track, marriage, and starting a family. She said that's a lot to do in a relatively short period of time. She says, I sit in front of an aimless 20-something who's unfit for both marriage and work. She's dating down, sleeping with an idiot. She's extending her adolescence. Jay says, but what happens when we pat a late teen or 20-something on the head and say you have 10 extra years to gain skills, build a career, and establish values? She says, nothing happens. Absolutely nothing happens. We rob that person of the urgency to make something of their life. And Meg Jay's message to teens and 20s is to get going. Get on the education path. Get on the work path and skill development path. And get off the aimless bar hopping, hooking up, and waiting for your real life to start path. And that's probably not the case for most or anybody in here, but I speak to a lot of college-age people. And this is the message from Meg Jay. It's a great message. If you're a young person here today, don't waste your teens. Don't waste your 20s. Go to a good church like Embrace. Develop your character. Go through the necessary, boring process of building a career. Because the decisions you make today are going to affect you for the rest of your life. Some of you are thinking, well, I've blown it. No, you haven't. Well, we all have. But if you've wasted your 20s, here's what I would say. Don't waste your 30s. If you've wasted your 30s, don't waste your 40s, 50s, and 60s. If you're 82, go ahead and waste a few days. I mean, you've earned it, okay? That's great. But the point is, become a person of character in your teens and 20s. This matters greatly. And if you do that, you're going to win all the way through life. Parents, you got to live these things yourself. Okay? Second non-negotiable, you got to affirm your child's worth every single day. One thing I know about every young person here today is that they wonder about their worth. They wonder, am I good enough? Am I smart enough? Am I talented, pretty, or handsome enough? And gang, if they don't get those things answered at home, kids will do almost anything They will join almost any group. They will violate almost any rule to try to get their needs filled for love and belonging. If a child grows up not knowing that they're loved and have worth, they will do anything to try to fill what only God and you can fill. So look what the Bible says about every single person here in the room, watching online at the other campuses. It says you, every single one of you are God's masterpiece. It means that you are unique, that you are one of a kind, that God broke the mold when he made you, that your thumbprint is different than anyone else's who's ever traveled this planet. You are uniquely created in God's image. You are a masterpiece. And I want to ask you, do you believe that about yourself? That you are created perfectly in God's image? Marred by sin, we all are, which is why there's forgiveness and restoration. But the Bible says God knew you even before you were conceived. Think of this. God had you in mind before you were conceived. He knew he was going to create you. God had you in mind, and then the Bible says that he knit you together, and knitting is a very precise, tedious, God knit you together in your mother's womb just the way he wanted you to be. Do you believe that about yourself, that you are God's masterpiece? You are. He had you in mind before you were born. He said, I'm going to make a masterpiece, created or recreated in Jesus Christ. Because of sin, there's a new birth, there's a new creation when we come to Christ. And the reason is to do good works that God prepared for each one of you, each one of us, to do in this world. God created you just the way he wanted you to be, and then he gave you a purpose to do great things with your life. Gang, I promise you, parents here today, your kids wonder about their worth every single day. And if you don't remind them how deeply loved they are by God, they will go looking for it somewhere else. It doesn't mean you don't correct them when they're wrong. Doesn't mean you discipline them. You do. It simply means that you tell them repeatedly that you love them. Again, dads here today, please tell your kids on a regular basis you're proud of them. If you've never said those words, you need to say them this week. I'm so proud of you. Text them if you can't say it. Affirm their worth over and over again, and your kids will win. 10 years ago, my wife and I decided to take our kids and their spouses on a vacation. So we rented a house in Mexico, and we'd never done this before. But our son-in-law, Nelly, his last name is Nelson, nicknamed Nelly, just finished med school, and we wanted to celebrate his accomplishment. And the day we left Minneapolis airport, everybody was stressed. My daughter and daughter-in-law were both in tears. I have no idea why. And it was a rough start. But off we went, and I want to be careful how I say this, but my son-in-law, Nelly, had a hard upbringing. Parents divorced when he was 1, raised by a single mom who worked full-time, so he was alone a lot, didn't see much of his dad, was absent, disengaged. And I can tell you, stuff happens to a little boy or a little girl when they don't have a dad around, loving and affirming them. Author John Eldredge writes it this way. He says, every little boy and girl wonders, does my dad love me? Does he think I'm strong? Does he think I'm pretty or talented? Does my dad think I have what it takes? And those questions never got answered for Nelly, so I decided to be a dad to him. Take him hunting, fishing, make sure I tell him how proud I am of him. So we were down in Isla Mujeres, Mexico, and the 4th night we picked a restaurant. And it had this open dining area, and we were the only ones there. It turns out The owner was also the chef, and he was going to do the whole thing. He was going to cook for us on the grill and then serve us. And it seemed like the whole night was just planned just for us. Nobody else was there. So I decided to take a risk. Sitting at our table, I said, hey, we don't have to do this, and if you think it's dorky or stupid, we won't. But what if each of us just thought of one thing we were grateful for this last year and shared it at the table? My daughter Meg went first. She always likes to get stuff out of the way. And it was great. And Sarah, my daughter-in-law, was second, David's wife. And then my son David turned to Nellie with emotion in his voice, Meg and Nellie. And they'd been through so much, living thousands of miles away from home, in poverty, going to med school on the island of Dominica, not the Dominican Republic, island of Dominica. You never heard of it because it's on the backside of nowhere, and it's just an awful place. And then they had to move to Saginaw, Michigan to finish, and Saginaw also not the best, just barely hanging on. My son David looked at Meg and Nellie, and this is what he said. I am so proud of you guys. You've been through so much. No money, living in crappy apartments, far from family, wondering if you'll ever make it, but here you are. And then he looked at Nellie, and he said, Nellie, you're going to be a doctor. And Sarah and I are so proud of you, so thankful you're in our family. We're just in awe of both of you. And then it was Nellie's turn. And he couldn't even speak. For several moments, he just bowed his head a little bit, and you could see the tears just streaming down his face, staining his shirt. And finally, he lifted his head. He said, what I'm thankful for is this family. Because now I know I belong. And then all of us were wiping tears from our eyes. And I don't know what else God was doing in the universe that night, but it seemed like he was shining his love down on that little table in Nowheresville, Mexico. And it seemed like God was saying to us, just take it in, because there's nothing better in the world than when you know that you belong. Friends here today, nobody else is fighting for your kids. But if you as parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, coaches, teachers,